Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our second webinar of our Business Festival today. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Laura Hodgkins and I'm the Event and Training Team Leader here at the Chamber, and we're delighted to have you here today. Good morning. Just so you're aware, we are with Mark Osborne today, the Regional Growth Manager for Avanti Trains. Mark, if you want to share your screen, I don't know whether you can do that now. Brilliant. Yeah. We are going to be talking about the future office and the railway today, so a very exciting topic for us. For those of you that don't know, you can pop in the chat any questions that you've got for today, just at the bottom of your screen. And Mark, it's over to you.
Thank you very much. Let me just find the magic button there. Is my screen sharing to everyone?
You are?
That's I am. Perfect. So I introduce myself. So I work for a company called West Coast Partnership, and I'll go into what that actually means in a future slide. Obviously, we're talking about the future of the office and how the railway kind of respond to that. A bit of background on myself. I'm a chartered transport planner, which involves a lot of things about how transport networks work and proving their value. And I work as a regional growth manager for the West Coast Partnership, being that kind of first contact with our stakeholders, so local authorities, the chambers of commerce, those people outside of the railway industry itself who have got a real interest in how the railway works for them. Maybe it's always a good idea to introduce the railway itself. So there's a lot of stations in the UK. We have a lot of route miles, and those stations vary from huge London terminuses where tens of thousands of people go through every day to little platforms made of wood out in the rural Scotland where you have to put your hand out to stop the train and they only come every other day. So a real big and varied type of network. It's a very challenging structure as an organisation. So Network Rail own all the physical stuff, the trucks, the stations, the bridges, and the viaducts, and they run some of those stations. And then the companies that run the train, the 17 franchised train operating companies, and they run the remainder of the stations. There's concessions, which they kind of have a contract to run services, and so there isn't the kind of competitive nature or revenue generation as much as in the franchises. There's also what we call open access operators, where companies who want to run services that the franchises don't see as viable can identify things there. And those companies lease a lot of their kind of the facilities they need. So rolling stock companies, or Roscoes as they're called, they own and lease the trains to these train companies. Very much like, you would lease a building, and same companies could have those trains for decades. But all of that's going to change come 2023 with government announcements, something called Great British Railways, which we're still finding out about what the finer detail of that actually is. But it will seem more of a contract basis with more focus on what the country needs rather than maybe like a revenue generation as a pure commercial operated railway. So we're going to talk about the West Coast Partnership, and the West Coast Partnership is actually one of these is actually a bit of a trial for these kind of contract basis. So it's kind of split into two operations. There's Avanti West Coast, which is the brand name you'll be seeing on the West Coast main lines, replace Virgin Trains as the operator of long distance services. And we'll be adding new trains and hopefully serving and increasing our services over the coming years. And a slightly challenging name, should we call it, the Shadow Operator, which makes it sound like a Marvel supervillain, but is actually part of our business, which is looking at what HS2 and services on the existing line could be once HS2 is opened. So HS2 Limited are building the new railway, and our part of the business is figuring out where these services should go to, what kind of offer should be on there, like what kind of food offer should be on, what type of seating, what kind of layout, what's the customer base, things down to then the car parking demand that's needed at the stations that are going to be served by HS2 trains. So there's a whole wide piece of work that has to be done by the time that HS2 opens. And when HS2 does open, our franchise will be running, or our contract will be running, the services you see now, branded as Avanti West Coast, and those ones on HS2. And there's a big reason why it's very much partnership piece of work, and a lot of our contract is about delivering certain achievements. So we're very focused that this is one of the rail network that serves all 3 countries in Great Britain, so Wales, Scotland, and England. That's been challenging in terms of some of the COVID restrictions, because every country has different restrictions. So if you are everyone on our trains going from England into Scotland, you'll be told the different restrictions about masks and seating distances. Over the last few years, some of the big city regions have had metro mayors with power around rail. So we've been involved with them. And again, when we're kind of talking about the work that I do as a regional growth manager, and my other colleagues doing the same, is that we're getting out there and talking to businesses and finding out what they really want. And we have to work with a lot of people inside the rail industry as well. So HS2 Limited, who are building a new line, Network Rail is a current operator, and a myriad of other rail operating companies. And those kind of government elected bodies, or with elected members as kind of head of state, like the DFT and those metro rail organisations as well. So there's a real kind of whole mix of the work that we have to do. So we have to be really involved and partner up with a lot of people. Here's our kind of a mission. So we really want to ensure that we're not just running the trains, but we're helping spread benefits from new services on the network, and getting really involved in, transport is not the basis of a means to an end. We want to, it's a reason for people making journeys, and that could be around economic and leisure, access to opportunities such as education. So we've got to really focused that it's not just about running trains, it's about helping customers make journeys that help them. And very much, as I kind of said, in that partnership thing, we're there meant to be really work very closely with a lot of people, rather than being siloed as we're running our trains to this timetable. So here's just kind of a quick infographic about all the kind of things that we're looking to do. I think I've kind of talked through them in kind of increasing services, looking at ways for making the buying and selling of tickets a lot easier. It's always a very challenging industry to understand if you're not a regular rail traveller, about how to go from one place to another. And so part of our kind of remit is to look at ways simplifying that as part of not only our existing services, but also ready for HS2. And also kind of reflect that the journey doesn't start and end at the stations, that people have got to get to the stations and get from it. So that's where one of the strongest things, and things that I've been working on, is help people to do that. And it's all very focused on improving things for the customer. So we're working very hard on changing our rolling stock, and I'll jump onto that a bit more. I've talked about the simplifying of tickets and increasing our services. Very much there's a high focus on being more sustainable. So we're looking at ways that the stations that we manage, how we can make them much more efficient. And that's kind of part of that kind of commitment that we're a partnership, not just a train operator. We're kind of investing in our local communities as well, and putting funding into that, and working very kind of closely on, high-speed rail is fairly new to this country. And so we're looking at ways that we can drive innovation and new industry opportunities with the academic sector. So kind of collaborating with the University of Leeds, who've got a very strong transport programme, and ways and we can do that. And here is just kind of a list of the things and the funds that we've created as part of our contract to enable that work with the local community. And really, these are the kind of funds that we say to the local industry, we don't want to say what we want to do, you tell us what you need, and these are the different ways that we can do it. The internet has kind of quite fundamentally changed the rail industry over the last 20 years. The way that tickets are bought has changed quite dramatically since it. In many ways, it's now the primary way that people purchase and decide to travel by train. And we're trying to take that further with the kind of introduction of smart card rollout, improved kind of ticketing platforms. So not only can, when you buy your train ticket, you will hopefully get the option to buy a car parking space, so reversing place, or your bus ticket. Or if you go in for a day out, say to Alton Towers, you can buy your train and access to Alton Towers and the transfers between it at the same time. So they're kind of the opportunities and the links that we want to develop with local attractions. And at the moment, because of COVID, or kind of escalated because of COVID, you can order your food from your seat on the train with a mobile phone app and have it delivered to you. So kind of really seeing what's the next stage in those kind of options. So coming down into Staffordshire, so we serve currently 4 stations in the county. So obviously Stoke-on-Trent, we're working very closely with the council, and I was on site at the station yesterday in Stoke, looking at how their what's called their Transforming Cities Fund programme, which is capital investment in the public realm outside the station and improving access by bus and by taxi to and from the station. So really make the station more of a gateway to the city. We're working with the council to put in additional power facilities, and that will hopefully enable the kind of the empty space in the grade 2 listed building of the station to be used for whatever type of opportunities are out there, whether it be accommodation or for office accommodation, retail. But one of the challenges is making sure that that building can provide those types of services. And that's just kind of one of the wider station enhancements that we're looking to do at Stoke. We've got a whole range of improvements to waiting rooms, to should we call them the infrastructure of the business, so how the boiler system, the lighting, the heating, making those kind of strategic upgrades, not only to make the station nicer, but also more sustainable. Again, those same things are happening at Stafford. And again, I think I'll jump onto it in a future slide about how we can support their wider aspirations as a borough to develop the land around the station. And currently at the moment, we serve at Lichfield, Trent Valley and Tamworth in the kind of the morning and the PM peaks, but we're hoping that in the future years we can increase the number of services serving those places. And I say, as someone from Tamworth, brought up in Tamworth, that'd be quite good for coming back to seeing the family. So hopefully in the coming months we can start sharing what we're thinking in terms of increasing our services at all those stations, not just in Staffordshire but across our network. And how we're doing that is in part by securing some new trains which are currently under manufacture. So we're adding to our fleet. We're buying what's called bi-mode trains, which are electric and diesel, and these will replace our current diesel Voyager trains, and they'll be used on our services between London and Chester and Holyhead, which for infrastructure reasons isn't fully electrified. But we're also adding a number of additional trains to our electric fleet, which will enable us to increase services at all our stations, and they'll start coming in the next couple of years. And not only that, we're doing a big refurbish of our Pendolino fleet, which surprisingly, considering they still look in good condition, are coming up to about 20 years old, and they're being refurbished throughout. And again, some of those improvements I'll kind of talk through and how it relates to actually the future of the office. So that's kind of what's happening and what we're doing now, but I'll just quickly kind of cover over what the West Coast Partnership Development side are doing. For those who might not know, that's the HS2 proposed network. Only phases 1 and phase 2A have currently got royal assent from government, and they're the service patterns that we're looking on now. No timetable has been set. This is what was in the business case for High Speed 1. A lot of what is currently Avanti services and destinations will kind of move on to HS2, and that provides so many opportunities for the existing West Coast main line, whether that be more increased freight services, which there's quite a demand in the logistics sector. And obviously, I think this has come a bit more in the news in the last few weeks with the driver shortage. Obviously, moving freight by rail is a great opportunity to do that, but you need space on the rail network for that to happen. And also the opportunity to increase the number of local services or semi-regional services, we might call them. So again, places like Tamworth and Lichfield, who only have currently one train an hour to and from London, HS2 gives the opportunity to increase that. So there's a real kind of opportunity that just because your station isn't on the HS2 network doesn't mean you might not have a substantial improvement in services. And our West Coast Partnership Development colleagues currently got about 26 different timetable options, which they'll narrow down over the coming months, and that will be consulted probably next year, asking people what to do. So I've probably talked quite heavily about rail there and not maybe on the future of the office, because that was the way we were going in the direction of travel. But then obviously COVID has hit, and that's fundamentally changed how a lot of people are maybe looking at rail and travel in general. And it's also kind of quite affected how the rail industry has been happening over the last few years. So obviously travel was restricted. It was limited to essential journeys only. The number of services that we normally run between to and from London went down from 9 to 4. Some of that was down to demand. Some of it is obviously, of course, that our staff aren't immune from COVID either. And we had to make sure that we had enough people to run a suitable service pattern to make sure that those who do need to travel still have the option to do. That has kind of led to that end of the rail franchise model, which was starting to struggle a little bit anyway, where there wasn't enough competitive tendering going on. Our West Coast Partnership franchise was kind of held up as the way to go. So it was very much a kind of shared pain, shared gain with the DFT in how the franchises won. So if we had more passengers than we were expecting and made more money, that was shared with the DFT. And then if things went wrong, then those challenges were also shared. So it made it a lot more stable that rail franchise companies would not go out of business because what they predicted in terms of demand didn't happen. Obviously, many people who worked in an office suddenly became home workers. And I think businesses saw positives and negatives from that. And obviously a lot of businesses, including ourselves and even my previous employer, are looking at what that means. Does that mean that permanent home working is the way forward? And I'm sure some businesses are thinking that is the way. Is it going to be more flexible? And obviously for businesses, changing those kind of working practices enable them to look at opportunities to downsize their office need or even close them. So a real kind of, I think COVID for everyone is that kind of real challenge about, is this the way that we should keep on doing things and how we live? And those kind of the challenges that people are quite rightly asking. And there's lots of questions or some commentaries, should we say, that is rail capacity still needed? And it's projects like HS2 is right. So not to get all defensive and challenge those things. And as a transport planner, I always like to have some tables and charts in anything I'm presenting. I think that question can be quite answered that it's still quite a positive yes, that while commuting is important and a big demand on transport networks, whether that's road or rail, it still only makes up about a fifth of all journeys. There's been a big demand in rail over the last 20 years. And thinking the last 20 years, that's when the internet has gone from being the availability of the few to being instantaneous and virtually in everybody's pocket. So there's still lots of demand for that. And also to reflect that our transport network in many places is very old. It needs challenging maintenance and repair. And so there's an importance to make sure that our transport network is resilient and reliable for the future. We've got a transport network that's very car dominated, and that makes challenges in terms of the flexibility and reliability we need for our economy, really. So the investment in rail is needed for a whole multitude of reasons. And I think these two tables kind of show it quite clear that car still dominates for a lot of long distance trips. HS2 will make a huge part of the country more accessible by its ability to provide more capacity and shorter journeys. So the market for rail is very much in those segments there that you can see are dominated by car, and even a long distance internal flights in the UK. And while not really part of my industry as a passenger train operating company, we have lots of challenges around freight capacity. And again, I mentioned that the challenge we have about drivers is that a lot of freight is moved by road, very little by rail. And one of the big challenges about doing that on rail is there's not the paths, as we call it, or the space on the train network to take these freight trains. And one of the benefits of the investment that's been made over the last 20 years is that more capacity is being released. And projects like HS2 provide that additional capacity. We have a whole range of environmental challenges around zero carbon and building back our economy. Most viable economies have a good transport network that helps them to perform better. So obviously, I think the UK is given out as being quite poorly performing against countries such as Germany and France, who have a much better economic performance based on the number of like staff or labour performance. And part of that is down to their have a much better balanced infrastructure programme around the country. And also there's been a real kind of growth of what I call agglomeration of new industries. So as challenges and changes to our economy, they've kind of created jobs where people need to be based in one location. And very much different parts of industries are around each other. And the railway industry being very much about moving to big centres where lots of activity happens is kind of well placed for that. So the world's kind of recovering from COVID. Hopefully we're at the beginning of the end of the COVID pandemic. So we're now back to increasing our services from that kind of baseline of 4 we've had for the last few months. We have more seats available to reflect that kind of changing in how people travel to and from the office. Flexible season tickets have been introduced across the network. We'll be able to sell advance tickets again soon. So rather than the kind of government regulated tickets, which can be expensive but flexible, there's the opportunity to have those kind of advance tickets back in. And demand is starting to return quite strongly. So we're already around 50% demand. And on certain routes, it's even higher, which feels pretty, feels like we're heading in the right direction, considering the scale of what COVID has done to transport demand in general. I must reflect that is for ourselves. Different operators have different kind of demand profiles. And we're working hard in kind of keeping our trains clean and safe. So during the pandemic, all our staff, we made sure that they have the right protection things. We had different circulations within the station. So one way is in, one way is out, to kind of reduce the kind of conflict and potential for spreading COVID. And that's kind of leading to this kind of increase in promotion and advertising. So the rail industry as a whole, you might see their advertising campaign, and ourselves have launched our own promotion activity called Feel Good Travel. And I wanted to kind of put it on the record that I consider this to be a tortoise, but somehow our business thinks this is a turtle. So if anyone wants to kind of support me on that, I'll be grateful. So I've kind of come in and talked a lot about rail there, but obviously the query there is about what's the future of office. And I'll touch on a bit. And these are the kind of, I think, the slide that I kind of indicated before, that over the last, how rail and I call it information technology or telecommunications, is that they both kind of hand in hand at the same time. So yes, I would suggest that, the internet and broadband might change how people travel, but people still travel. So those two charts there, side by side, shows that, there's been a big increase in people working from home, but that's also gone hand in hand with an increase in rail use. Now, whether that's the causation and correlation argument, but there's been a lot of those kind of different changes in the whole market. So yeah, rail patronage has grown in a period where home broadband has become pretty unique, and even to the fact that it's now in our pockets. Motoring costs have continued to gone down against the retail price index. So year on year, motoring has become cheaper compared to most living cost expenses and even public transport expenses. But what's really helped rail patronage in that time has been a greater agglomeration of these kind of new service industries in our major cities, and a lot spent. Finance is obviously a big one in London, which has kind of dominated the growth of transport, of rail demand there. But the same has happened in a lot of other cities and locations in the country. And I think it's still maybe not as important or at a high level that it should be. But there's been a growing level around, environmental concerns of building new road infrastructure and building houses, estates on greenbelt land or in more remote locations where it's kind of car dominated. There has been a kind of a switch in the last 20 years compared to the periods of the 70s and 80s, where big brownfield sites are slowly kind of being regenerated. And so the massive expanse that we saw in the 60s and 70s of greenfield housing development has kind of slowly reversed. It's still a big challenge, but that's kind of helped focus increased use on the railway, because that's fits railways a lot better, having lots of good land development around stations. So that the railway kind of fits a lot of the new ways of working. So it fits a lot of the kind of high industry focus at the moment in kind of traveling between cities and getting people from the suburbs into them. There's a kind of a change in industry as well. The days of you go into the same desk in the same office for years on an end has changed. There's an expectation with a lot of businesses and operations now that there's times when you need to be in a different office. So the challenge of having, hot desking has been around now for a long time, very strong in some industries. And the railway has been kind of successful at that need, that the people need to move around and be in different places to meet their customers and clients' needs. And that's that growth in those kind of services industries to do that. The same kind of reflects on maybe employee mobility, and this kind of maybe comes into my slides next around about the use of land, is that maybe employees are not mobile in moving house as much before, but they're more mobile in traveling to and from work. And that's kind of increasing those kind of demands. But we're not kind of staying kind of static. And also I mentioned earlier about the investment in our new rolling stock and Pendolino fleet is that we're investing in our rolling stock to become more meeting to those demands of people traveling to and from and around for work purposes. So our new rolling stock will have a higher number of power points on our trains. We're making a big investment in Wi-Fi. So last week we announced that we're investing with BT £45 million to improve connectivity on existing 4G masts that are close to our network, where we have some blackout spots, should we call them, where you might not get reception. So that should mean that you can have a good connection along your whole of your journey. And even a bigger commitment is that we're installing 5G masts specifically for the railway out of London up to the Midland, Staffordshire, Northwest area, where most of our customers are, so they can get that greater connectivity as they travel to and from whatever journey they're making. And we're also kind of changing our offer on the train. So we've introduced a new kind of class of a ticket called Standard Premium, which sits between our first class offer, which we're going to upgrade to maybe slightly more high quality than it was in previous days, as well as our standard services as well. So I think there's always got to be the big focus, and as a transport planner by trade, I want to say that transport is only moving from one type of land use to another, and how we develop and build our land uses is going to be the real key driver why people travel, to be perfectly honest. And there's been a big switch over the years, and the coming of HS2 has got lots of local authorities interested along the route, because that's a way of enabling investment in their land, especially land that's been challenging or has high cost to develop. So I've got the example there of the Stafford Gateway scheme that the local borough council is promoting, and we're working alongside them, hopefully, to make this scheme come through. And a lot of that kind of drive to looking at the rail network as a place to invest that probably wasn't there a long time ago is because of those kind of concerns that, the cost of road building, it doesn't always stack up. It can be very expensive to keep on progressing, and that costs to do it. The availability of land, we're kind of restricting those kind of greenbelt developments. It makes you look at land that's currently being developed a lot easier. So it makes it a lot more attractive for people to come and invest in land. And that has a big effect on how people travel for work as well. So these are kind of, I think when we get into kind of the future of office, is there's been very much that, yes, people can work from home, but there is a real challenge that is it the right place to work? We have a housing shortage, which kind of indicates that there's not a lot of space in existing houses. I've always kind of reminded in this job and in my past job that decision makers at director level in organisations that maybe while they'll have home space in their home for a home office, the challenges of graduates or young people being able to work from home is they might find themselves working on their bed in their childhood bedroom space because they don't have the space themselves to provide that. So there's a real kind of challenge there for young workers, especially not only working from home, but how do you get that skill development and training to them to do that? They're also more likely to be in kind of less secure tenancy in terms of not being homeowners, so that how they're going to kind of have that chance to have that proper working environment, I think a real challenge. There's also something that maybe people haven't really thought of, and that's something that comes to mind, is that when you're working from home, you've still got to kind of follow those kind of business financial information security things that you do in an office. It's much easier in an office environment than it is in a home environment. I know scenarios where the local planning officer who's writing the plan for a council on where housing should be built, her husband is a housing developer. Now, they may do as much as they can to make sure that those kind of security aspects are balanced, but it feels very challenging when you've got two people on different sides of the industry in the kind of same accommodation. How do you make sure that information is kept secure? And even if everything's doing wrong, you're wondering as a resident of a borough, if you knew that relationship, you'd be concerned that things have been done properly. Now, this is where I might start losing people listening in, because there's nothing more than a transport planner needs to do is to start reading through government guidance and web tag. And these are the kind of things that I've heard a lot about. Maybe people won't travel by train as much, considering COVID and working from home, but there's kind of maybe real challenges around the car ownership model that we have in this country. That, two-car households are fairly normal, but I'm sure people, if they're looking at their outgoings and their home working in the last few months might be considering, is this time to downgrade one of our cars? That would produce quite a saving in expenditure from the house. And this might be this challenge around what's called mobility as a service, or MaaS, is in the same way, if those on the call can remember the days when if you wanted to make a phone call, you had to find a red box on the street and put coinage. It's now changed to a service contract that sits in our pocket. And there's an argument and discussions in the transport planning industry that are we moving to a process where you buy a contract for travel, should we call it, which includes your bus pass, your train pass, access to a car hire scheme. And so you can pick and choose the transport mode that you need for that journey, rather than being solely focused on maybe once you've invested in a car, that's your drive towards trips. And this kind of change in how people travel is going to be quite a big change in how government potentially might spend its transport money. Transport money is, any money spent on a transport scheme has to follow what's called the FT processes, and this is something called WebTag, which is kind of Transport Advisory Guidance, or is that? Yeah, I think that's right. And a lot of decisions made on transport is valuing the time, and on that table there, you can see there's different times for different journey habits and different costs, whether you're commuting or if you're traveling by leisure. Now, if the commuting becomes quite reduced, then we might find that those values need to change, and that might change how money is spent in transport. It might move it away to other types of journey habits. It might remove the focus. A lot of transport focus is about saving time, which you end up with this scenario of lots of money being spent on a motorway junction because it saves thousands of people a few seconds and the value is quite high. That might change quite dramatically if commuting habits change. So they're the ones that the queries, as me who's worked in transport planning for a long time, is will COVID lead to this different change, and so will commuting values. So I've kind of come to the end there, is that while we think in the rail industry that there is going to be a big change around how people travel to and from the office, the trends over the last few years show that railway and telecommunication improvements have gone hand in hand, really. And COVID has kind of really just accelerated those existing trends rather than create new trends around it. There's also that kind of case that decision makers, should we say, are these people who work in offices and have found themselves working at home in the last few months, thinking that reflects how everyone travels. That we've got to remember that the majority of employment and traveling to and from work is done by people who don't work in an office. And majority of commuting journeys are actually very short and normally under 5 miles. So the future of the office might change, but the future of the work might not. That people will still be commuting to the whole range of manual, semi-skilled, and still skilled roles, which involve going to a specific building that has specific facilities. That will still be quite a lead, especially as I think we're growing into kind of, I want to call life sciences and those kind of skilled new industries. You're not going to be able to do that from your dining room table. So I want to say, to kind of summarize up, that we think it's not going to be the end of the world. It's going to be challenging and changing, but that's what I think, say, modern life and industry and commerce is all about. And so there's still quite a lot of unknowns to talk about. So I'd like to thank everyone for listening, and I hope people who join later on online find this useful as well. And my contact details there, if anyone wants to ask questions or discuss further.
Mark, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much. And such a brilliant insight into what's coming up and sort of everything that's happening. Declan, I can see that you've got your hand up. Is there a question that you would like to ask, Mark?
It's not so much a question, really. A couple of things. Just to say thanks, Mark, for sorry I couldn't jump on till late, technology and all that, but it was really good to be a part of the webinar this morning. And just really to sort of add to your point you made about travel patterns having changed in recent years. I know we spoke about this when we met last month, but very interesting to see how Avanti's reacting in terms of, upgrading the trains, allowing people to use it for work in between meetings. There's been such a shift of travel patterns over the last 18 months, but I think there will still be that need to travel, even if it's on an infrequent basis, going to meetings in head office every so often. So, really good point you made there. And it's good to see that the investment is going in to help with that.
Yeah, I kind of just touched on that. I think we'll see people travel, and I think I've known a lot of people who've I think we discussed this, that while people who currently travel or used to travel 5 days a week into London to work in Canary Wharf, the change in habits might mean that you only have to go there 2 days a week, and they might find themselves moving out of their, being called their small 1-bedroom basement flat in London, and finding that a nice 4-bedroom house in Stafford, Stoke or Staffordshire is a better way, and they'll commute to those 2 days a week in London that way. Probably spending the same amount of time commuting and the same amount of cost. It's just done in a different way. So as part of the transport industry, we call it, we need to adapt to fit that change in habits.
Brilliant, Mark, absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. And don't forget, there will be a webinar library for all of the webinars that have gone on this week, and of course all the webinars that are sort of coming up as well. They'll all be on our webinar library, including this one by Mark. Mark, thank you again so much. Really appreciate your time this morning, and it's bye from me and from Mark and everybody else. Bye everyone.
Bye all.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.